Thanks for joining us at Right On Replicas, where we're proud to bring you the best scale model kit reviews on the planet. This review covers the vintage re-release of the military record truck from 2013, and it's a 1/32 scale Revell kit, number 85-7816. It's a skill level 2 kit for the intermediate builder, and was previously released by Revell and in the Revell Blueprint series kits. But now it's out of production, but they're still available at online auction sites and garage sales. It consists of 156 pieces molded in gray with 5 crew members and a shipping crate. It's actually an M65 5-ton wrecker, and this wrecker was introduced in '51 after the war, and its 6-wheel drive 5-ton chassis made this vehicle with better road capabilities than just about any other vehicle except for a tank. It also included a 360-degree hydraulic crane with 20,000-pound lift capacity. Now that was a solid workhorse for the Army in the post-war era. Now this kit's a pretty realistic depiction of an important vehicle in the Army's inventory, and Revell has given us a nice combat support vehicle for our collections. When you're done, the finished kit's about 11 inches long, 4.5 inches wide, and 4 3/4 inches tall. Here are the contents of the kit. As you can see, there's quite a few pieces, crew members, and the wheels are hard plastic and will need to be painted. But I could pick each piece up and sprue and talk about it like they do in what they call open box reviews, but I'm just going to show you all the pieces here in 10 seconds, and after that we'll actually help you build the kit. Now remember, use the manufacturer's safety and use guidelines when you see or hear any products mentioned in the review. As I was looking the kit over, I noticed that on the back sides of the crew members there's some severe sink marks, so we're going to fill those in with some of your favorite putty, and then we're going to use something to sand them off without trying to remove the detail from the rest of the crew member there. So I used an eraser and some of that green scruffy material to sand it smooth without damaging the other features. After I smoothed out the putty, I put a light coat of primer on the crew members, and then I used some Testors 1164 flat for their hats and some flesh colored Tamiya XF15 on the skin, and for the crew members boots I used an 1166 Testors flat brown and some 1167 tan for their uniforms. Next I assembled the two halves of the engine. It's a simplistic affair, all molded in, but you can pick out the details for a decent look. I painted it mostly greens with some steel accents on some of the pieces, and of course the air cleaners and the radiator sections, they're flat black. But you can pretty much figure that most of this was drab green in coloration. I'm skipping ahead a little bit here to show you how the engine is mounted into the frame, and then the exhaust is painted, steel color, and then with a little rust for effect, and it'll be mounted in this fashion. The transfer case goes together next. Parts 24, 27, and 28 are assembled together, and avoid getting glue in the hole there because that's going to receive the drive shaft later on in the build. So gather up the front suspension pieces, the springs, and the lower front winch drum, number 59, and then assemble that to the frame assembly. And ensure that the edge of the springs snap into the position receivers on the frame. Also attach the towing printle number 52 piece at the rear of the frame. And set those aside to dry and use some strong cement there. And you can see how the front springs are oriented onto the chassis here. So just as a reminder, remember to scrape off any paint that's on the parts where you're going to mate them together to get a good join. And shown here is the transfer case painted flat black steel color and then mounted into the frame. You can see the orientation and location of the front springs and the transfer case here. They were painted kind of a flat black metallic color. And then the frame, of course, is olive drab, so it's nice and straight. The version I got, make sure that yours is. If not, put it under some warm water and bend it back into shape. Make sure that it's good and flat. Get out these spindles here, and we're going to assemble the tie rods number 19 and the spindles 17 and 18 and put those together. And note that there's a notch on the tie rod that will lock into the spindle and allow the front wheels to turn left and right. And this shows the front spindles, and note there's quite a bit of flash on them, so you're going to want to sand that off to make that look more smooth and correct. So grab these parts out of the kit to build the front end differential there, and then assemble the front differential by capturing the spindles from the previous step between the top, number 15, and the bottom of the differential, number 16. And then the drive shaft, number 61. Now avoid getting glue on the pivot joints if you want the front wheels to be movable. So this is how the parts go together from the bottom view, and they're now painted and the differential is installed to the springs. Now we can assemble the rear axles. First glue 2 of each differential tops number 9 to the bottoms number 10. Then insert the 2 differentials into the spring assembly number 11. Now these will only fit into number 11 in one way, and this keeps it from this keeps them facing the front as it should. Now install the jack shaft number 25 part across the 2 differentials, and the open end will point towards the front of the truck when installed into the frame. Now, part 27, the rear spring support, will only mount one way, and you need to orient the assembly to the frame before proceeding. So you must ensure that the tab on the side of part number 7 you see here is on the same side of the axle assembly as the notch in the frame rail before installing part number 12 and then trapping it with number 7. You can see the notch in the top frame rail there, so ensure that when aligned your axles face forwards, and don't glue the spring support number 7 to the springs to allow it to pivot like a real suspension does on terrain. I did find some more sink marks on the drive shafts, so I had to add some putty and sand those off nice and smooth. And this shows the drive shafts after the putty has been installed into those sink holes. So now go ahead and scrape the glue off and check for your locating points and install the rear axles and the drive shaft onto the rear end and into the transaxle there. With the chassis assembled, we're going to assemble the wheels. And now first put the front wheels 2 parts each, numbers 1 and 2, and the inner rear duals, those are 4 parts each, numbers 1 and 3, and the outer rear duals 4 parts each, 4 and 5 together. And this shows the front tires installed using cap number 60, and then apply the glue sparingly inside of the cap and affix it to the end of the axle to avoid getting glue on the wheel assembly or they won't roll. Now install the inner rear duals using pin number 8 and make sure that it spins freely in the wheel before you attach it. A little filing to the outside edge of the head of the pin might be necessary for proper insertion and seating. Again, watch where the glue goes so that the wheels will spin. Now as you can see, the wheels were painted olive drab like the body, and then I added several coats of flat black to the tires to achieve a rubber-like appearance there. Now you can install the outer dual wheels to the rear axle assemblies and use care to set them in to make sure that they're square to the inners, or your gap between the 2 wheels will be off and they'll look uneven. Now assemble the fuel tank, that's parts 38 and 39, and attach them to the right side of the frame. And there's a molding flaw in the tank left that you'll see that you might want to fix prior to painting with a little body putty. So the other photo here shows the right side of the frame after it's installed. Install the firewall to the floor and ensure that it's aligned with the floor and the fenders. And then attach the cowl across the hood sides, capturing the doors 53 and 54 in the process. Avoid getting glue on the door hinges, And this shows the alignment of the cowl to the firewall and the hood sides to the fenders. You can see the firewall alignment with the notch on the right side of the fender. Now we'll install the rear cab wall number 41 to the floor, ensuring alignment along the outside edges. Now this shows the alignment of the cab rear wall, and I did these steps quickly so that I could use the doors to ensure that I had the rear cab wall at the proper angle to avoid gaps in the door jambs. So there's another maxim you'll need to remember: test fit everything first. The arrows here point to the alignment tabs on the top of the fenders outside on the hood side, and after painting they're very obvious. But install the left and the right hood sides, that's parts 30 and 31, to the fenders and the firewall. And you look down into the cab to ensure that you have the hood sides aligned and the cowl tight before the glue sets. Now, I test fitted the grill at this time to ensure that the hood sides were in proper alignment. And after painting, I noticed that the guides on the top of the fenders for the hood sides were there, and I would probably have removed those before painting. So you might want to do that to get a nice clear finish. Just mark where the fenders are supposed to go. There was a slight flaw in the grill here in the red circle that you'll need to fill before you do your final paint. So this is where we attach the grill number 35 to the front of the hood sides, keeping it flush with the top of them. And then this picture shows the grill and the hood being used to ensure proper alignment. You also can install the headlights, and the windshield frame is on there because the unit is now ready for primer. After painting the base drab, there are some other fine detail painting that you'll want to do. And here's a list of the finishes and the things that were painted with those particular colors. So you can use this as a rough guide, and always, of course, use your own discretion if you want to follow a different version. But this is how I painted some of the detail work. Here's the front of the cab in the olive drab. Also note that I've attached the mirrors and the parking brake handle into place before I sprayed it with the olive drab paint. Go ahead and put together the halves of the inner boom assembly, and then construct that by, you just capture number 142 piece between halves 151, and so then avoid getting any glue near the pulley area though. Assemble the outer boom by capturing the drum number 157 and the ram 156 between the boom halves 153 and 4, and then use the inner boom to ensure that you don't make the outer boom too small so that it will slide easily in and out. In other words, you may want to decrease some of the tension on the two halves to make sure that you get some movement there of the inner boom. Next, we can add the cable guide number 159 and the crank drum retainer 158 to the outer boom assembly. And this shows the completed boom assembly after being painted with the olive drab. This rather intricate assembly is the operator's bucket, and you just assemble the halves of that together with some good strong glue. Next, we can construct the operator's bucket by adding the seat number 124 to the bucket, and then the control panel 128 and the levers 129 and 130. Now attach this to the right shipper brace, part number 120, and add the fire extinguisher. And then capture the hydraulic cylinder number 155 between completed operator's bucket and the left shipper brace number 121. This shows the completed bucket after detail painting from the list that I showed earlier. Now we can mate the two assemblies by gently prying apart the two shipper braces and fit to the bottom of the outer boom. Put that in between them. And then there's a pivot pin and a limit pin on each side of the boom that will fall into place in the shippers. Now after the boom is in place, position it so that you can put the ram in from the boom into the hydraulic cylinder on the shipper. And here's the assembly attached also to the operator's bucket. This part's a little tricky, and I gotta admit I didn't do a real good job with it, but in step 10 in the instructions it explains the rigging of the snatch block on the end of the boom, and as it took both hands and a third to do mine, I couldn't get any real good photos of it, but it's pretty straightforward. But the first time I tried playing with the boom, it kept bouncing back up, and it would wind around, and the thread got twisted. So now the line at my snatch block is twisted when there's no weight on it. Once you put a little weight on it, it comes apart though, but I think that's the nature of the thread that they supply in the kit more than anything else. Assemble the four stabilizers here, the legs, and there's parts 131 and 132 that are assembled to make those. Grab these parts and attach to each of the mud flaps to part number 133, the retainer plate, and set those aside for painting. Now this shows the two retainer plates here after assembly, and then attach the rear steps 135 and 6 to the rear retainer plate and set that aside for painting also. Grab the truck bed and install the hydraulic cover, and note the position of the filler cap here in the red circle. Now you can add the oxygen tank 127 and the acetylene tank 126 to the to the front of the bed. And then note here, this shows them after they've been painted olive drab with the rest of the bed. Now looking at the bed from the rear, this shows the winch rollers and the center pivot for the crane installed. And then this also shows the rear winch installed into position. Now we can add the vise to that's part 138, to the rear center of the bed as well. Add the spotlight number 122 and the spare tire 163 and 4 to the outside of the left shipper, and note that all is painted now, and go back and mount the stabilizer legs to the bottom of the truck bed. Lay the two stabilizers in each track and ensure that both pins are on top of the tracks. Then install the retainer bars in the respective positions and glue them into place. But try not to get any glue on the tracks or the legs won't slide in and out. Now the stabilizers were extended here so that I could glue the middle of the retainer plates. Deviated a bit from the instructions and decided to install the bed to the frame at this time. I attached it there before I did the cab. Now this view shows the tabs that align the bed and the cab on the frame, and ensure that they're aligned with the tabs on top of the frame rail, and glue them securely into place. And then I used a small C-clamp to hold it there and make sure that it's set properly at all four corners. And I also show clamping the bed here onto the frame for gluing. To give you a clear idea of how it goes together, here is the winch assembly before painting. So you can construct that by capturing drum number 149 and the pulley 143 between the winch halves. Now avoid getting glue on the parts and add the winch drum retainer 150. Now there's also decal number 15, and then the foot of thread that's installed onto the truck bed. Next we can add pivot, which is part number 118, with the pin, part number 119, and the rear winch rollers 137, and the hydraulic cover 116 to the truck bed. The parts are shown here assembled after the paint, and the rear winch and the roller assembly are mounted permanently to the truck bed. On the left here, you'll notice that that pin seems to interfere with fit. So the one on the left side in the photo, that goes against the manifold. So I had to trim that off somewhat, and also sand down the other side with canister to get it to set level. And then after the cab is secured to the frame, install the air filter assembly. The bed was set hard and fast. I attached the cab, and the main attachment points are inside the front fenders underneath the hood. This photo shows the cab gluing points that are visible just in front of the exhaust pipe, and the same location on the left, the driver's side there. Slide the crane assembly onto the pivot and you are basically done with your build. We'll work on the decals next, and they're pretty straightforward, and most of the surfaces are fairly flat. But if you find that putting a decal over a contour, I suggest you use some of the setting solutions available on the aftermarket. Now this photo shows the hood decal, and notice that the two turn signal decals there are in the grill. Now the big white star number 1 goes on the center of the hood with the top pointed at the center of the windshield frame. And the next 2 stars are centered on each door. And you can use the box art and these decals shown here as a guide on how to install those just make sure that you squeeze out any water or air bubble trapped underneath the decals, and use plenty of warm water to place them. Now on the truck bed, the Army and the M559 and rear red reflector decals are put into place. And then this photo shows the decal placement on the rear of the truck, but I haven't put the taillight decals on yet, and I'll paint those instead. So you can see the hook that I made for the winch cable just from a piece of craft work stuff from Walmart there, and it just seemed to add a little bit of detailing that comes from a necklace type of craft. Kit comes with a really nice cargo crate that you can build and display with the wrecker, and after assembly I painted it with a combination of light browns and then dark brown overtones to simulate a wood grain. And then I used some setting solution to apply the decals so that they would fit over the crevices and contours there and look like they were painted on. Well, there you have it. There's a view from the underneath, and this kit is remarkably good specimen from the old kits of one of the Army vehicles that didn't get a lot of attention from the other model makers at the time. But as you can see, it's fairly well detailed and makes a great display piece. It's something that's quite a bit different than just your average tank or even your truck. So if you could do a little test fitting and spend a little time on fixing some of the sink marks, etc., you can put together a really nice looking model for your display. Hope you've enjoyed this step-by-step premium model kit review, and so that you don't miss any more, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. But you can find us on Facebook and at our website right on replicas.com. Thanks.